When we were in Hawaii, Kathleen came up and said, would you like to give a talk at ATL? And I'm going, well, yeah, it's been a while since I've done that. I'd love to. And she said, what would you like to talk about? And I said, well, you know, Bob Proctor and I are working on a new program right now called Fourth Dimensional Leadership, and that would be a natural because I'd like to try a couple of things that we're working on out on a live audience and see how it works. And then this little niggling voice inside said, seriously? And I said, shh, yeah, seriously. Yeah. No, that's what we're going to do. That's what I'd like to talk on. And I came back and talked to Sin about it, and this little voice said, seriously? And what it was talking about was this thing that has been floating around literally, since October of 1980 in my mind. And it was titled, it was a book project, and it was titled, I Am God. And I've got a mock-up of this. Bob had kind of punched me around a little and said, when are you going to do that? And I am God. There's a couple of things about this. One is it's a mirror. So technologically in 1980, it was a little difficult to put a mirror on a book. And so this is a Mylar thing. The interesting thing about this, it's just imperfect reflection coming back, which is part of what the design was. The other thing had to do with this set of words, I am, and that word, God. And they are separate. They are separate. And that is how we tend to experience life, is separate from. So when I started paying attention to that little voice that said, seriously, we went back into session, and Kut was doing his, well, he was actually doing his thing in Croatia. But I got together with Kut and talked to him a little bit, and he said, where's the fear? What are you scared to do? What's calling? And so I said to Kathleen, I'm going to do I Am God. And immediately, what came up with that was, I mean, it was like, who in the hell are you to stand up and say, I'm God? And have people say something about it. I mean, all the fears, all the judgments, everything that I would imagine would be there were all in my head. And I go back to 1980, October of 1980. When I first had this idea, it was an epiphany. It was one of those transcendental moments where I just recognized the connection of everything, and I knew that I was God. But I also was humble enough, I think, and perhaps scared enough to know that I couldn't claim that at that point in time. It was just not, I didn't have the chops. I didn't have the experience. I had the intellectual understanding that we were all connected. I had had a momentary glimpse of the actuality of that. And I didn't have enough to be able to confidently put this down and to do anything with it. So it's been laying fallow for, well, 24 years. And in that 24 years, I've done a lot of stuff. And I've actually been fairly successful at doing a lot of stuff. And most of it, I grew up in Oregon. And I mention that because I kind of grew out in the country, and we used to, when I was a kid, we'd go out and we'd catch snakes. And the way that you would catch a snake is you get it distracted by something shiny, and then you come up behind it and grab it. So the work I do in corporations is kind of like that. It's transformational work. But I put something nice and shiny out there that they think that they're looking, trying to get, and then I'll come back up and we'll grab them. And they look up and go, what happened? And something has happened. And something fundamental has shifted. And that for me is the work that I do, and it's a transformational process. I meet them where they are, attract them with something shiny that they think is attractive and something that they'd like to have, and then we get into the real conversation. I'm doing some work with a hospital system right now, back on the East Coast. I'm going out again on Tuesday. This was a group, now this is a hospital system, they're in the healing business. This CEO and his executive team had been fired by 2 consulting groups because they were so dysfunctional. They were toxic. They were absolutely toxic. And as a last ditch, we were asked to come in and see if we would do any work with it. And the initial assessment was, you've got to be crazy. Because the 2 consulting firms that had fired them were the premier consulting firms in the healthcare space. And I looked at these guys and I said, there's a possibility. So we developed something attractive and shiny for them. And I made an offer to the CEO and said, look, in order to do this, I need to have a commitment from you. First of all, I need to be able to coach, or our team needs to be able to coach every single person on your executive team, 10 people. And we need at least a year with them. And I need a 3-year commitment from you that we will continue this work for that period of time. So it's not just the coaching work, it's what happens after the coaching work. Because literally we're looking at shifting the system. And to his credit, he said, yeah. Now we're about 18 months into this thing right now, and this thing has literally turned around. They are actually on track to win a Baldrige Award, which if you know anything about the Baldrige, it's a very prestigious award for excellence in management and just in the way that they operate. The whole structure there had to do with a recognition, and this is where Neil was really, I think, useful in defining this on Friday. It's recognizing the divinity. Recognizing the divinity. And my job really was to hold the space for them to be what I knew that they could be in my heart. I could see that. So the conversations we had, everything that we did and are continuing to do is about who wants to come out here and how do you want to play in the sandbox with each other as God. Now I'm not using that word right now with them. But that's kind of where we're going. And essentially what I've come to work with is an understanding that this word, this set of words, there we go, I am, is where everything begins. Everything begins with I am. And how you answer what follows is fundamental to what your experience in life is. This is an identity question, and it's unequivocal. I mean, how you answer it in the dead of night at 3 a.m. in the morning, this is what you wake up to, is your answer to this question. And Donald talked about the way that we as a culture have a pathological religious orientation, we have a pathological societal you just kind of trunk it down kind of like nested dolls. It begins with this question of I am, and part of the question I am goes back to, actually predates Rene Descartes, where he's talking about I think, therefore I am. And there's an implicit separation in this. There's an implicit separation from others. There's an implicit separation from spirit. There's an implicit separation from heart, because I think up here, I don't think down here. There's an implicit separation from nature. I am does not invite, typically in our cultural way of growing up and experiencing, a connective conversation. I am is a solitary orientation. I am is an egoistic way of framing things, typically. Now, when we start looking at this, and this is really where I started playing with it, if I start really examining what do I think is true, I've got a lot of beliefs. Every one of us has a lot of beliefs, but what is really, really, really true? And Don also talked about examining our willingness to examine our belief systems, or just being able and willing to rigorously examine what we hold to be the truth. And if you are willing to do this, you'll strip away a lot of stuff. And fundamentally, in my experience, and I've actually done this, I've done a ton of writing around this, and I can say actually categorically, everything that I have held to be true has a yeah, but. There's an exception that I can find to just literally everything except one thing. I do exist. I am. Siddhartha, sitting under the Bodhi tree at the end of his quest, patted the ground and said, I am. And that is the root. And what that signified was literally, I am, and the ego dissolves, and what's left is what's true. What's left is what's true. Now, there was no sound with this. And when I was setting this up, Jonathan asked, well, is there sound? Because it looks like there should be sound. God's pretty silent. And that's why he doesn't get noticed a lot. Yeah, And it's not anthropomorphic. I mean, we've assigned an anthropomorphic identity to God, and God is not anthropomorphic. God just is. There's no she, there's no he, there's probably not even an it. Because when we start identifying God as outside of ourselves, there's a subject-object correlation that comes into play, and whatever's outside of me by definition isn't me. I want to watch my language, how I'm thinking about God. I want to think about myself in the holistic, generative context. So that's kind of where this all came up when I started putting my thoughts together around how in the hell do I even position this, and how do I do this without appearing or sounding arrogant? Because for somebody to stand up and say, "Who are you?" "I'm God," is a little presumptuous. And it's the truth. And it's the truth. And that's where we need to move from. The little film clip here. How are we going to answer it at the end of the day? We did our best. Or did we? We are in a state, I think, of human consciousness and human development on this planet where we are primed to be able to let go. There's enough consciousness, and this is where the mycelium comes in. It's information. There's enough information without a central brain, which another way of saying that is that there is consciousness appearing without a central brain that is informing our actions if we are willing to listen and if we're willing to pay attention and to step into it. We are at a point, I think, in our history as a species on this planet to walk away from separation as the dynamic that we live through. I'm one of the co-founders of an organization called Business Alliance for the Future. Ronaldo with the Business Academy. And one of the things that we're talking about is the responsibility of business is to take responsibility for the whole. It's not a separation. The invitation is to look at the stakeholders that businesses attend to as if there is no trade-offs. It's not we're going to do this in deference to the shareholders. Shareholders are no more or no less important than any other stakeholder group that these organizations actually interact with. And that includes the environment, that includes the customers, it includes their vendors. They're all equal. So if we can take trade-offs off the table as a conversational default or a conversational out, what we're left with is we're making choices based on connection. We're making choices based on a recognition that if I do something here, it is a system and it's going to have impact over here, and I need to be aware of that. And it will have impact on me. So